Hey guys, tonight we are diving into the cramped and noisy world of babysitting in deprived Victorian homes. Imagine walking into a nursery that's not some pastel-colored haven with toy bins neatly arranged, but rather a dim, cramped little room smelling faintly of damp wood, sour milk, and yesterday's gruel. The walls lean in too close, the window glass is fogged with grime, and in the corner a baby is already wailing like you've personally insulted its entire family line. You're standing there, not with a diaper bag and baby monitor, but with a rag that's been used for pretty much everything under the sun, and maybe a chipped cup of watered-down milk. Let me just say, you wouldn't last 10 minutes here without wanting to run back to your modern life. Honestly, you'd crack before the first diaper roar. Whatever counts as a diaper in this century. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. I'd also love for you to drop a comment with where you're listening from and what time it is. It makes me smile to imagine someone halfway across the world dozing off while I whisper about lice and porridge. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You step closer into the room and immediately realize this is not babysitting as you know it. It's survival. Children here don't nap quietly with lullabies playing from a Bluetooth speaker. They shriek in chorus, like a street protest you never signed up for. Their cheeks are smudged with soot, their hair tangled into impossible knots, and there's always one toddler clutching something sticky that you pray isn't food. You bend down, and the floorboards creak beneath your knees, betraying just how old and worn this house is. Unlike today, where you can order baby wipes in bulk with a swipe of your finger, here you've got one rag, and that rag has already seen too much. The soundscape is relentless. One baby wails, another coughs, and a third laughs manically at nothing, which, frankly, is a little unsettling. Your ears buzz with the constant hum of need, and the smell its equal parts coal smoke drifting from the hearth, and the unmistakable aroma of unwashed everything. If you're imagining lavender-scented fabric softener, please erase it immediately. The best you're getting here is something that smells vaguely less terrible than yesterday. You scoop up a baby, hoping the crying will stop, but instead it just changes pitch, like you've only unlocked a hidden bonus round of noise. You sway back and forth, your arms aching, your balance off because the floor isn't quite level. You think of your ergonomic baby carriers, the ones that distribute weight evenly, and laugh. Here, it's your biceps against gravity, and gravity is winning. A little boy tugs at your skirt or trousers, whatever the exhausted babysitter. Uniform is tonightened. You glance down to see eyes so large they almost make you forget the chaos. Almost then, he sneezes directly into your face, and you remember where you are. It's not just the noise and smell. It's the endless clutter of the nursery. Cracked wooden toys lie scattered, cloth scraps double as blankets, and in the corner sits a cradle patched together with mismatched nails. You try to rock it, but it groans louder than the baby inside. The rocking chair, if you dare to sit, squeaks so badly it could be mistaken for another crying child. And yet, here you are, tasked with the impossible. Keep them alive, maybe even calm, while parents work 16-hour shifts or collapse from exhaustion. Historians still argue about how much supervision Victorian children actually had in homes like these, because sometimes babysitting meant the older children watching the younger ones while barely more than babies themselves. Picture a 6-year-old scolding a toddler with the authority of someone who still can't tie their own shoes. It's chaos, parenting chaos, and you're caught in the middle. Today, people complain if the babysitter gives the kids too much screen time. Back then, screen time wasn't an option, lest you count staring at the soot patterns on the wall and hoping they don't crawl. What strikes you most is how normal it all feels to the children. They don't flinch at the cold draft slicing through the cracked window or the taste of bread that's half stale. They know no different. For you, it's like being thrown into a reality show where every challenge is stacked against you. Except no one's going to hand you a prize when you survive the night. The prize is just: the kids didn't set fire to anything while you were rocking the cradle. Congratulations, you wipe a runny nose with the rag. The same rag you've used 3 times already. And try not to think too hard about hygiene. Soap is a luxury, water is icy, and the children act like washing is some cruel punishment. You can already imagine them wriggling away like eels when the time comes. Compared to your modern bathtub with warm water and bubble foam, this feels medieval. Actually, medieval might have been easier. At least there'd be fewer buttons on the clothing. But amid the chaos, there are glimpses of sweetness. A little girl clutches your finger, her grip surprisingly strong, her smile gap-toothed and radiant. It's the sort of moment that makes you soften, even as another child dumps porridge on your shoe. You realize that in between the noise and dirt, there's resilience. These children have a way of finding joy in scraps, laughter in exhaustion, and companionship in the cramped corners of a tiny nursery. And as you lean back against the wall, balancing one crying infant on your hip, you can't help but feel a weird sort of admiration. You wouldn't survive this your Netflix queue. Your central heating, your oat milk latte have spoiled you beyond repair, but these children, they thrive in ways you can barely understand. It's a reminder that while the comforts of modern life are miraculous, there's something enduring about the human spirit that pushes through. Even the most deprived nurseries of Victorian times. So, you take a deep breath. Coal, smoke, sour milk. Baby sweat tanned. Whisper to yourself, you're going to make it through the night. Or at least, until the parents stumble back in. And when they do, you'll hand over the sticky, soot-covered bundle of children with a smile, knowing you've witnessed a slice of history most people only imagine. And you lived to tell the tale. You don't even have time to catch your breath from the nursery chaos before the next crisis emerges. And this one comes on an empty stomach. Dinner time, more what counts as dinners, announced not with cheerful jingles from a microwave, but with the dull scrape of a pot against blackened iron. A thin broth simmers, though calling it broth might be generous, since it's mostly cloudy water with a few vegetables that look like they've already lived several lives. The smell is faint, like hope diluted with disappointment. Children swarm, bowls in hand, eyes sharp as if they've been training for this moment their entire short lives. You watch as the oldest manages to snag the first ladle, which contains a miraculous piece of turnip floating in the middle. The younger ones cry foul, but no referee whistles here, just a nanny figure telling them to hush before the neighbors complain. It's less like family dinner, more like an early preview of reality TV competitions. Forget MasterChef, this is Survival Chef, and the judges are perpetually hungry kids. And here's the thing, meals this thin weren't occasional. In many households, bread was stretched until it crumbled, butter was an illusion you only dreamed about, and meat was reserved for moments so rare they were practically legendary. People in Victorian London even coined jokes about how some pies contained more crust than filling, if any filling at all. Compare that to today, where kids squabble over whether their snack has enough chocolate chips, and you can't help but laugh at the absurdity. Imagine plopping a modern child into this kitchen. What do you mean, no pizza rolls? What's a gruel? Still, it's not all exaggerated tales. Historians note that malnutrition was one of the quiet killers of the era. Children needed calories they never got, so they grew up stunted, with brittle bones and shallow reserves of energy. Doctors at the time argued endlessly about whether poor diets or polluted air was the greater danger, though honestly, both worked hand in hand like a bad comedy duo. And the debate continues. Was hunger the root of so many illnesses, or merely one strand in the whole tangle of Victorian misery? You stand there watching the children scrape their bowls clean and wonder how anyone reached adulthood at all. The funny part funny in that bitter, ironic ways that food wasn't always scarce everywhere. Wealthy households down the street were feasting on roasts, puddings, and wines. Sometimes, scraps from those kitchens trickled down to poorer neighbors, wrapped in paper or carried by a sympathetic maid. You've probably heard of the cliché about children staring longingly into bakery windows, and yes, that happened. But sometimes bakers would sweep leftover crumbs from the floor and sell them as penny pieces. Not quite the pastry case you're used to at Starbucks. As you watch the children here, you realize they've learned the art of stretching everything. A single slice of bread gets divided into 4, then 6, until the piece left on your plate looks more like a shadow than an actual meal. And yet they guard it fiercely, hands curled tight, eyes darting to make sure no sibling dares to snatch it away. These are culinary battlefields disguised as dinner tables, where victory means a full bite instead of just a lick. One girl sneaks a crumb into her pocket, saving it for later, a tiny insurance policy against hunger that gnaws even in her sleep. That's the part no one tells you. Hunger doesn't leave when the bowls are cleared. It lingers in the stomach, keeps children awake, makes them restless, irritable, and sometimes oddly inventive. There are stories of little ones chewing on leather scraps or gnawing bread crusts so hard they chipped their teeth. The sort of details no one writes into children's books, but lived quietly in households like these. You tilt your head and think of your own pantry, probably overflowing with cereals and boxes taller than some of these kids. A shelf stacked with chips, candy bars tucked away, maybe even that tub of ice cream you swore you'd save, but never do. The contrast is so sharp it feels almost unfair, like you've stumbled into another planet where the rules of hunger bend differently. Here, kids don't ask for seconds, they ask if they can lick the pot. But amid the struggle, you notice something strangely inspiring. The children share in ways you don't expect. When one toddler drops his meager bread, another picks it up, wipes it half-heartedly on his sleeve, and offers it back. No tantrum, no hoarding. They've learned, painfully but effectively, that generosity keeps the group afloat. And somehow, even in this bleak setting, a giggle escapes when someone tips their bowl too far and spills watery soup across the table. Hunger makes them sharper, but it doesn't erase their spark. You sit back, your own stomach twisting just from watching, and realize how easy it is today to dismiss the privilege of full cupboards. You're used to variety. Smoothies in the morning, takeout when you don't want to cook, energy bars in shiny wrappers. These kids didn't have the luxury of being picky. Their menu was whatever appeared in the pot, and if the pot was empty, well. Bedtime came early, with stomachs rumbling. It makes you wonder about resilience, about how much the human body adapts and how much the human spirit resists giving in. Hunger shaped lives here, but it didn't always break them. And sitting with that thought, you feel the quiet lesson forming. You begin to hold your own comfort with more care, recognizing how miraculous it is to live in a time where you can open your fridge and choose instead of beg. So you let the scene fade. The scrape of spoons, the small squabbles over crusts, the eerie silence that follows when bowls are licked clean. In the background, the pot simmers faintly, already nearly empty, promising nothing but more hunger tomorrow. And yet the children smile, crumbs at the corners of their mouths, as if for a moment they are satisfied. You watch them and think maybe that's the truest survival skill of all. Learning to find fullness even when the world gives you scraps. Just when you think hunger was the hardest part of the day, someone announces bath time, and suddenly you realize the universe has a darker sense of humor than you gave it credit for. Bathing these children isn't a soothing ritual with lavender bubbles and rubber ducks, it's a battle. And you're the unwilling general, the weapon of choice. A dented tin basin filled with icy water that looks like it's been borrowed from the Thames. The moment you dip your hand in, your fingers sting, and you understand why the kids are already backing into corners like fugitives. You try to coax one toddler closer, but he shakes his head, clutching the leg of a chair as if you're dragging him to the gallows. And honestly, from his perspective, maybe you are. Soap, if it appears at all, is a tiny sliver so worn down it could slip through the cracks of your palm. Forget fruity scents or moisturizing promises. This soap is plain, harsh, and stubborn, more brick than bar. You scrub once, twice, and it doesn't even foam. You think of your fancy body wash, at home eucalyptus, chamomile. Little micro beds that make you feel like royalty and laugh. Because here, you're grateful if the soap doesn't peel your skin off. The children resist with all the energy their gruel-fed bodies can muster. One kicks, another splashes, and the baby lets out a scream that could summon rescue if only anyone cared. The floor is instantly slick with water, your clothes cling to you, and the whole scene looks less like hygiene and more like a tavern brawl in miniature. You try to remember the last time you heard a child laugh in a bubble bath, surrounded by toys shaped like submarines. Compare that to this chaos. No toys, no bubbles, just a cracked basin and kids with faces red from scrubbing. If modern bath time is spa day, this is a full contact sport. And yet, this wasn't unusual. In many working class homes, baths were a rare luxury. Water had to be heated over coal fires, and coal was expensive, so why waste it on washing? Families often shared the same tub in sequence, oldest to youngest, with the water growing darker by the minute. By the time the baby climbed in, the water looked more like soup than something you'd want on your skin. Some households skipped bathing entirely for weeks, relying on the occasional sponge wipe to keep acceptable. It makes you shiver to imagine. But back then, smell wasn't just tolerated, was expected, still. Historians don't fully agree on how common these wash routines really were. Some argue that families were cleaner than stereotypes suggest, pointing out records of public bathhouses and weekly wash days. Others insist that most children grew up grimy, only touching water when absolutely necessary. The truth is probably tangled somewhere in between. But when you're standing in this nursery with freezing water splattering your ankles, it doesn't matter what the debate says. For you, this is the definition of misery dressed up as childcare. And here's a detail you probably don't hear often. Some Victorian households believed too much bathing was unhealthy. Doctors warned that exposing the body to cold water could weaken the constitution, even invite illness. So while you're standing there wishing for soap that actually works, someone else in this century might argue you're doing harm by scrubbing too much. Imagine trying to pitch that to a modern parent. Don't worry, skipping baths will keep your kid strong. You'd be laughed out of the pediatrician's office. The children certainly aren't convinced bathing is good for them. They squirm, whimper, and sometimes outright escape, dashing naked across the room while you chase with a cloth. You slip on the wet floor and nearly topple into the basin yourself, soaking your sleeve up to the elbow. For a brief moment, everyone bursts out laughing, even the kids. And in that laughter, you find a strange pause. A reminder that even misery can spill over into joy when shared. Still, you can't help but think of your own shower at home, where hot water cascades endlessly at the twist of a knob. You probably complain when the pressure is weak or the temperature takes a second too long to adjust. Here, that luxury would be unthinkable. Imagine telling a Victorian mother about a bathroom where every child could bathe alone, with warmth and soap to spare. She'd probably look at you as if you were describing heaven itself by the time you finish. The children are wrapped in whatever rags pass for towels, shivering but slightly cleaner, though clean is a generous word. You're drenched, exhausted, and questioning every decision that led you here. But then you catch sight of a little face, cheeks flushed, hair damp, eyes wide and bright, and it hits you. For them, this is survival. For you, it's perspective. You walk away realizing how miraculous it is that in your life, cleanliness is so ordinary you never stop to notice it. So as the last drops fall from the basin onto the wooden floor, you tuck that thought away. The next time you step into a steaming shower, let gratitude be the first thing you feel. These Victorian children didn't have that gift, but you do. And maybe that's the true lesson hidden beneath the splashing and screaming. That the simplest comforts of today are treasures the past never knew. The moment you survive the icy splash zone of a so-called bath, you're rewarded not with peace, but with shrieking. Not polite, modern, decibel monitored, crying the kind your phone app reassures you is within normal range. No, this is a wall of sound so raw it feels like the house itself is rattling in disapproval. You learn very quickly that every wail is not created equal. There's the sharp, dagger-like cry that means someone dropped half a crust of bread, the drawn-out opera note signaling I'm hungry again, and the silent scream face that warns you of a storm so catastrophic that only divine intervention or distraction with a rag doll might work. In today's world, you'd reach for noise-cancelling headphones, or maybe post a dramatic parenting meme about it. Here, you lean in like a battlefield translator, trying to decode toddler Morse code. One whimper equals cold feet, 3 hiccuping sobs stand for I want the toy, and that blood-curdling howl. It might be anything from I'm overtired to a goat looked at me funny. Nobody writes this down, of course. You become the app, the algorithm, the predictive text for human emotions barely taller than your knee. It's funny, isn't it? Today, we brag about multitasking. I answered emails while making avocado toast. Back then, parents were balancing a boiling pot, a crying baby, and a half-collapsed roof, all while trying not to set the hay mattress on fire with the cooking flame. Now there was multi-dash tasking, and here comes a twist. Tantrums were not just background noise, they shaped entire households. A child's scream could halt work, interrupt trade, even send neighbors peering through doors. In some records, it's said that communities treated children's loud crying as a kind of weather report. Too much noise meant sickness brewing, or worse, the ominous sign of bad fortune. Did every village truly believe that? Well, historians still can't quite agree whether these cries were superstition markers or simply stress levels, measured by the human ear. Either way, you can't exactly swipe left on the volume dot. Now, a lesser-known detail floats into view. Soap wasn't the only thing scarce. Patience itself was a commodity. Mothers and caregivers sometimes carried charms or whispered protective phrases when children wailed, half to calm the child, half to soothe their own fraying nerves. Imagine clutching a tiny amulet while your toddler throws themselves face down in the mud because you cut their bread too thick. Doesn't sound so different from today's gentle parenting mantras. Except now we package them on pastel Instagram slides. Of course, not every cry was about frustration. Hunger, illness, and discomfort roared through those little lungs daily. Without modern medicine, a simple toothache could unleash a week-long opera. And here lies a shadowed truth. Surviving childhood itself was a gamble. Many never made it past those tantrum years, which adds a sting of perspective suddenly. The squeals echo differently, carrying both irritation and the fragile heartbeat of life. And yet, humor sneaks in, because it always does. One chronicler writes about a child who refused to stop screaming during a sermon until the vicar tried sprinkling water on him. The child quieted only to burp loudly, sending half the congregation into poorly hidden laughter. Who knew tantrums could double as public entertainment? Meanwhile, in your world today, a tantrum in the supermarket earns side eyes and whispered judgments about sugar intake. At least back then, the chaos got you a story for the parish gossip chain. Pause for a breath. Inhale, exhale. Picture yourself in that dim, straw-strewn room. A child's wail pierces the air, bouncing off wooden beams, mingling with the crackle of a fire. The caregiver rocks, hums, whispers, anything to coax peace. There's no pacifier, no streaming lullaby playlist. Only the rhythm of arms and the faint hope that exhaustion will win over stubborn willpower. And here's the part you can carry with you today. When your ears ring from too many voices, too many notifications, too much everything, remember those walls of sound from the past. If they could survive without baby monitors, white noise machines, or even the luxury of stepping outside for fresh air, then maybe your chaos too is survivable. Maybe those cries, even the most eardrum-shattering ones, just proof that life, in all its messy stubbornness, goes on. So when the tantrum era overwhelms you, think of it as your own cranky chronicle, a daily chapter you'll laugh at later. And be grateful that your biggest debate isn't whether a scream foretells plague or famine, but whether you'll run out of snacks before bedtime. After tantrums fade into exhausted sniffles, you think perhaps finally a moment of peace. But no, peace is a luxury, and what you actually inherit is movement. Crawling, scratching, twitching movement. Lice, fleas, rats, the uninvited guests of every household, small but relentless. It feels less like parenting and more like guiding children through a jungle safari. Except instead of parrots and monkeys, you get squeaks and bites. You notice it in the bedding first. A restless child scratching behind their ear, tiny red marks on pale skin. Today you'd rush for shampoo in a cheerful bottle, maybe even a pediatrician's advice with a side of online reviews. But here, You reach for vinegar, ash, or if fortune smiles, herbs, boiled into a pungent rinse. A war fought without victory, only temporary truces. And unlike your child's imaginary monsters hiding in closets, these creatures are stubbornly real, with no bedtime curfew. And then, the rats. Their presence is not just annoyance, it's danger, dressed in fur. They slip through cracks, sniffing at crumbs, bold enough to dart across the room while a child plays on the floor. Imagine telling a toddler, "Don't chase it, good luck." In modern sanitized playrooms, you fret about Lego pieces swallowed. Here, the toy itself might squeal and bite back. What makes it darker is the shadow these pests carried. Disease was never far behind. You've heard of great waves of plague sweeping through Europeus. The Black Death centuries earlier left scars so deep they haunted generations after. But even in later centuries, outbreaks lingered, arriving like unwelcome relatives you couldn't lock out. A common event of the day, neighbors whispering about sudden fevers, mothers clutching their children tighter when a cough rattled through the alleys. It wasn't melodrama, it was survival instinct. There's a curious detail. Tucked in old records, sometimes families would shave children's heads entirely, not for fashion, but to make lice patrols easier. Picture an entire brood of nearly bald toddlers, not for cuteness, but for pest control. That's one of those things no parenting blog tells you, and yet, in its own way, it worked. Lesser-known solutions, born from desperation, carved into daily life. Of course, not everyone agreed on causes or cures. Some swore that disease spread from the foul mists rolling through cities. Others pointed fingers at foreigners, at trade, even at divine punishment. Historians still debate whether ordinary households truly believed in bad air as the main culprit, or if it was simply the explanation that fit into their exhausted vocabulary. Whatever the belief, one truth was constant: the rats didn't care. They thrived, feasted, multiplied. Now, compare this with your world. Today, a bug in the kitchen earns you a frantic text to the landlord or an Amazon order for traps delivered within 24 hours. Back then, pests weren't occasional. They were roommates, and not quiet ones. Modern playrooms are sanitized with pastel mats and plastic disinfectant bottles. Imagine bringing those pastel mats into a 14th century house. They wouldn't last a day, and yet humor clings even here. One account mentions children treating fleas as entertainment, lining them on a wooden board like tiny circus performers. Yes, flea circuses, something so bizarre it actually became a novelty in later centuries. It makes you laugh, doesn't it? Turning torment into pastime, misery into showmanship. Humanity's coping mechanism has always included a dash of absurdity. Breathe slowly, let the image settle. A dim room, straw mattress, alive with more than just dreams, children twitching in sleep, mothers brushing through hair with tired fingers, flicking away what they can. A rat scurries by the fire, and nobody screams they're used to it. The sound blends into the night like wind through trees. It's unsettling, yes, but it's also oddly grounding. This was their normal, and here's your takeaway. Next time you wrinkle your nose at a sticky playground slide or panic over a single mosquito bite, remember these families. Remember the parents who fought wars you can barely imagine, not with soldiers and swords, but with combs and candles. They lived in constant negotiation with nature's smallest soldiers, carrying on anyway. So, if you ever feel life today is unbearable, pause. You're not shaking out sheets for lice in the candlelight. You're not listening for the squeak of rats before you lay your child down. You have clean water, soap that foams, and playrooms without bite marks on the toys. Gratitude doesn't need to be grand, it can simply be the quiet relief that your daily battles are no longer fought against a swarm of tiny, scratching armies. Sleep, the great illusion of peace. You think nap time means rest, but here, in these cramped Victorian homes, it's a gamble with your sanity. One child finally drifts off, face softened against a lumpy pillow, and just as you begin to exhale, another jolts awake, shrieking as though you've personally committed a crime against bedtime. Forget the neat little schedules on modern parenting blogs back here. Sleep arrives like a mischievous guest who knocks once, then bolts down the street before you can open the door. The rooms don't help. Air thick with smoke from cheap coal. Mattresses stuffed with straw that smells faintly of last week's damp shoes. And lullabies that sound less like gentle songs and more like whispered bargains with fate. It's no wonder nightmares stalk the little ones. Imagine trying to dream in a room where rats scurry under the floorboards and the only light flickers from a candle, threatening to snuff itself out. Your brain doesn't exactly wander toward fluffy sheep in that setting. Nightmares were not just personal. They were practically communal events. Children waking in terror often startled the whole household, sparking a chorus of wails like an orchestra warming up badly. A popular belief at the time was that bad dreams came from indigestion because, of course, when you're gnawing on half-stale bread before bed, your stomach might rebel. Others swore that spirits visited in sleep, pressing heavy on the chest. Historians still debate how deeply families clung to these explanations. But you can imagine a tired parent blaming evil air rather than admit. Their stew might have been questionable. And then there's the part no one warns you about, the naps that end mid-cry. Modern parents have white noise machines, blackout curtains, and apps that track every wiggle. Here, your lullaby is the sound of a neighbor hammering, a cart rattling outside, or, if you're lucky, silence interrupted only by coughing. Every nap is a coin toss. Will the child stay asleep for an hour or 5 minutes? Place your bets. Spoiler, the house always wins, and you always lose. One little known detail slips through in old diaries. Some parents deliberately kept children awake longer than seemed kind, hoping they'd collapse into deeper, longer sleep. Wear them out, the logic went, even if that meant toddlers staggering around like pint-sized drunks. Imagine today's parenting advice column recommending, just let your child run in circles until they fall face first into the cabbage soup. Somehow, they survived it. Nightmares could carry heavier weight too. Families whispered of dreams foretelling sickness or loss. And when disease lurked around every corner, even a child's whimpering could feel ominous. Sleep became a fragile line between ordinary exhaustion and eerie warning. Yet, you still had to coax the little ones back under the thin blankets, stroking hair, whispering promises you weren't sure you could keep. And don't forget the practical hazards. Candles guttering near fabric, bed sharing in overcrowded rooms, the constant risk of fire. Putting children to sleep wasn't only about comfort, it was about vigilance. A single overturned flame, a spark in straw, could unravel a household. Compare that to today's baby monitors buzzing every time a pacifier drops. You get notifications for hiccups. They listened for crackling timber. You almost laugh, though, at the resilience. A child wakes crying. You rock them with arms that already ache, and eventually the sound ebbs. Outside, London's fog presses against the glass, muffling the city. The silence feels earned, stitched together by sheer stubbornness. Even then, it isn't long before another child twitches, mutters, and the cycle begins again. Peace is rationed like sugar, precious, scarce, and never enough. But let's slip a little humor in, because otherwise your eyelids might stay open forever. Think of modern naptime gadgets, sleep training clocks with cheerful faces, gentle playlists that shuffle Mozart into rain sounds. Now picture handing one of those glowing machines to a Victorian mother. She'd probably sell it for coal before you even explained what Bluetooth means. It's easy to groan today when your toddler refuses to nap in their crib that costs more than your first car. Yet here, nap time meant squeezing 3 children into one straw mattress, hoping the warmth was enough, and praying no vermin found the arrangement cozy. It's a scene equal parts chaotic and tender. Little bodies curled together, clutching rags as comfort, dreams weaving through coughs and sighs. So what's the lesson tucked inside all this sleeplessness? Gratitude. You may complain when bedtime drags on, when lullabies don't work, when you're forced to pace the hallway at 2 a.m., but at least you're not negotiating with fleas or wondering if the night's cough signals something darker. You have mattresses that don't scratch, blankets that don't crawl, and a measure of certainty that morning will come without disaster. Next time you rest your head, try to savor it. Remember those parents who stayed awake by dim light, steadying tiny dreams in fragile bodies, bracing against the unpredictable night. They carried more than exhaustion. They carried endurance. And if they managed to find a sliver of peace, maybe you can too, tucked safely in the comfort they couldn't even imagine. You think the hard part is getting children to sleep, but the real sport begins when it's time to dress them. Every thread, every button, every stubborn layer of fabric feels like an opponent in its own right. You might imagine tugging a sweater over a toddler's head today is difficult back here. In these dim Victorian rooms, it's a full-scale operation. Children wriggle like fish freshly caught, twisting away from sleeves as if cotton were shackles. And the outfits, not soft onesies with forgiving snaps, but stiff wool, heavy linen, strings, ties, and buttons small enough to vanish between your trembling fingers. Suddenly, modern zippers feel like the invention of the century. Morning begins with chaos. You reach for a chemise-thin, scratchy underclothing that clings to skin whether it wants to or not. Then the stays, or laces if the family is determined to mimic adult fashion even for children barely able to walk. Add petticoats, stockings, boots with more hooks than sense, and finally a dress or jacket layered on top. Dressing 1 child is an ordeal. Dressing 3 feels like punishment invented by history itself. You whisper bribes, make empty promises of treats that don't exist, and still the smallest wriggles free, triumphant and half-naked, darting toward the door like a feral sprite. It's not only inconvenience, it's expectation. Society peered closely at appearance, and even working families tried to maintain dignity in threadbare finery. A common event of the day, washing and reusing clothing until fabric thinned to transparency, patching holes with scraps, handing down garments so many times they bore the shape of every sibling before. For children, that meant never quite comfortable, always tugging at seams, hems too long or too short, fabric too tight across shoulders. And you, the weary caretaker, trapped in an endless wrestling match between propriety and practicality. The debates about children's fashion at the time almost sound comical now. Some reformers argued children should wear simpler, looser clothing for health, so they could breathe, play, even grow without restriction. Others insisted that miniature versions of adult dress instilled discipline and status. Historians still discuss how much of this was practicality and how much was simply the stubborn pride of parents unwilling to let their children appear anything less than respectable. And while the scholars argue, you're here with sticky fingers smearing soot across the last clean pinafore, there's a lesser-known detail to many children wore dresses, regardless of gender, until around age 5 or 6. It wasn't a matter of identity. It was convenience. Dresses were easier for toilet training, quicker to sew, and simpler to let out as the child grew. Picture a room of toddlers, boys and girls alike, in ruffled hems, running wild in what looks, by today's lens, like one grand costume party. Try explaining that to a modern parent, convinced their baby boy must wear blue and their girl pink, or else the universe will collapse. But back then, even the smallest detail carried weight. Buttons, for example, weren't just decorations, they were indicators of wealth. Poorer families often relied on hooks, ties, or nothing at all, leaving clothes hanging precariously. Imagine fastening a squirming child's jerkin with bits of string, knowing a single tug could undo your entire morning's effort. Today, a missed button is mildly irritating. In Victorian homes, it might mean a public scolding for sending a child out looking unkempt. And you can't forget laundry. The mountain of fabric didn't clean itself. With no washing machines, everything meant boiling, scrubbing, beating against boards, drying in smoky air that never smelled truly fresh. Putting a child into clean clothes was an achievement. But by midday, those garments already bore stains of mud, food, or worse. You begin to wonder if clothes existed merely as blank canvases for dirt. Now, imagine the comparison. Today's onesies and stretchy cotton. Engineering miracles, truly. Snap, zip, done. No armies of ties to loosen. No boots that require a degree in patience. And laundry press a button, add some detergent, and retreat while the machine does the battle. Back here, laundry is not a chore, but a life event. You chuckle at the absurdity, though. Picture a Victorian mother confronted with a modern baby wardrobe, aisle rows of neon colors, cartoon animals stitched across fleece, elastic that bends to fit. She might faint from shock, then recover and demand how much coal such marvels cost. If only she knew. Still, despite the hassle, there's tenderness in the ritual. You pull a sleeve over a child's hand, smooth a collar, adjust a crooked bonnet. The child squirms, complains, perhaps even cries, but for a moment you see the care hidden in the chaos. Dressing wasn't only about clothing. Babysit was about presenting children with dignity in a harsh world, wrapping them in what little protection families could afford. And that's where gratitude sneaks in. Next time you fumble with a stubborn zipper or groan at laundry day, remember these layers upon layers, these endless buttons that swallowed hours of daylight. Appreciate the miracle of stretchy cotton that forgives mistakes. The simplicity of clothing designed for actual children rather than miniature adults. What you endure now is inconvenience. What they endured was survival disguised as fashion. So when you tug your hoodie over your head, or snap your child into pajamas in under 30 seconds, maybe whisper a thank you. Because here, dressing a child is not a task. It's a saga. One filled with tangled arms, sighs of frustration, and, if you're lucky, a fleeting moment of pride before the child dives straight into the nearest puddle. Close your eyes for a moment and imagine yourself in a dim candlelit room. The faint smell of smoke and damp would curling round the edges of your patience. A child wails, not politely, not softly, but with the full ambition of lungs designed for torture. You sway side to side, your arms aching as though you've been hauling coal instead of cradling this deceptively small human furnace. Rocking is not optionally, it's your entire identity now. Rocker, hummer, pacifier, philosopher in the dark. Every squeak of the wooden floor under your foot feels like a percussion instrument in a lullaby orchestra. One you never asked to conduct, and yet here you are, inventing bedtime symphonies out of sheer survival. Compared to modern life, where you might hit play on a soothing playlist, or turn on a white noise machine shaped like a cute little cloud. This feels like being thrown into the Olympics of patience without training, without equipment, and without a coach, the most common ritual of the age. Singing lullabies is not always as gentle as we imagine. Mothers and caregivers repeated the same chants passed down for generations, sometimes full of odd warnings, half prayer, half scare tactic. Rockabye Baby sounds innocent until you realize it casually mentions a cradle falling from a tree. Comforting? Not exactly, but it was common enough to be sung in kitchens, parlors, and cramped bedrooms across towns and villages. The melody itself mattered less than the rhythm. The rise and fall that tricked an infant brain into believing the world wasn't entirely chaos. This wasn't just bedtime, music was a survival technique, repeated until exhaustion blended with melody. One little-known detail that slips between the pages of history is the use of soothing talismans, small trinkets or charms tied to cribs or sewn into garments, believed to quiet restless children. A lock of the mother's hair, a carved wooden token, or even tiny bells thought to ward off evil spirits. Whispering reassurances might calm an infant's fears, but sometimes superstition did the heavy lifting. It's strange to think that while you hum and sway, another parent of the same century might have been pinning a garlic clove near the baby's bed, because surely that would stop the crying. Today, of course, we'd sooner install a baby monitor with a night vision camera, proving that human beings still cling to gadgets and talismans only. Now they run on batteries, and somewhere in this endless dance between silence and screams lies a debate historians can't quite settle. Were lullabies primarily meant for the child or for the adult? When you sing the same tune over and over, letting your own breathing align with the rhythm. There's an argument that the singer is being soothed as much as the sleeper. Scholars suggest that what appears to be an act of care might just as easily have been an act of self-preservation. A whispered plea for calm that echoes back to the exhausted parent. Imagine humming to yourself at 2 a.m., half to settle your infant, half to avoid losing your grip on reality. That uncertainty lingers in the records, and no one can quite agree on the original intent. Now, let's compare it to your cushioned present. If you've ever scrolled through a dozen best baby sleep hacks blogs at 3 in the morning, congratulations, you've inherited the exact same desperation. Except you're probably holding a phone, not a candle stub. And when your Spotify playlist loops ocean waves, you at least know the tide won't suddenly mention cradles crashing down from treetops. Your rocking chair glides silently on smooth bearings, while in the past, each creak might trigger more tears. Still, don't get too smug. One day, future parents may laugh at your white noise machine, wondering how anyone believed artificial rain sounds were sophisticated. Humor lingers at the edges of this routine, Because what else can you do when you've sung the same verse so many times you could audition as a ghost in your own hallway? There's a dry comedy in imagining Victorian fathers pacing back and forth, muttering that maybe the child is simply allergic to silence. Or a medieval nursemaid believing her voice carried divine authority when in fact the child just got tired of screaming. And you, in the present, juggling apps and playlists, realize you are not very different, equally desperate, equally inventive, equally at the mercy of a creature who cannot form words, yet somehow controls the entire household. What becomes clear is that soothing a child has never just been about the child. It's about learning patience carved out of exhaustion, discovering the strange endurance that surfaces when you are needed. The rocking is not only for them, it's for you. 2. A reminder that you can bend time, stretch silence, survive a night. You see, while then it was trinkets and charms, and now it is gadgets and guides. The heartbeat of the effort remains the same. You whisper, you sway, you persist, and in the persistence lies the lesson history loves to slip quietly into your lap. Gratitude. Gratitude that you can lean on a playlist instead of a garlic clove. Gratitude that you can hum softly without worrying the floorboards will echo too loudly. Gratitude that you can pause, breathe, and smile at the absurd continuity of it all. Because whether under candlelight or lead night light, one truth refuses to change. You are singing, and in the singing, you are being soothed. To dot it sneaks up on you when you least expect it. Between the endless rocking, the spilled porridge, the laundry that refuses to dry in the damp air, there comes a moment so disarmingly gentle that you nearly forget where you are. A small hand curls round your finger with the determination of a sailor gripping a rope in a storm. A half smile flickers on a tired face, not because you've sung on keylets. Be honest, you haven't, but because for a fleeting second, the child decides you are safe. And in that fragile grip, you feel something that makes all the exhaustion pause, as if history itself conspired to show you that even in chaos, bonds grow quietly, stubbornly, without permission. These moments were the secret thread binding generations, though no one wrote them in ledgers or laws. In the world you now inhabit, filled with baby milestone apps and carefully staged photo shoots where infants wear matching pastel outfits, connection seems curated, polished for the camera. But in the past, bonds often formed in the mess itself. A smile while scrubbing wooden floors, a laugh that escaped between coughs in smoky air, a child tugging at an apron as though the fabric itself was a lifeline. The shared exhaustion became its own language. You didn't need to say you cared. The proof was in the aching arms and the lullabies sung long past sanity. Today, you might sigh with relief when a baby finally falls asleep in a modern crib. Then, you share it online for friends to validate your struggle. Back then, your only witnesses were the cracked walls and the echo of your own humming. Somehow, though the bond was just as fierce, one of the most common sights of the time, recorded in paintings and diaries, was children clinging to caregivers while daily work pressed on. They weren't set aside neatly with toys. They were woven into every activity. Babies strapped to backs while stirring stews, toddlers sitting under weaving looms, small fingers clutching at skirts as mothers carried water. Attachment was born not from scheduled bonding sessions, but from necessity. Daily chores and affection shared the same stage, often blending so thoroughly that love grew in the middle of exhaustion. The bond was not curated, was lived, and if you lean in closer, there are stranger fragments that rarely make it into the textbooks. Some households believed that a child's grasp carried omens, that if a baby gripped tightly, it foretold strength and good fortune, but a weak hold hinted at frailty or future illness. Superstitions like these colored the way parents interpreted ordinary gestures. To us, it's a baby reflex. To them, it was a whisper from fate. So when a child's tiny hand curled around yours, it wasn't just tenderness, it might have been read as a promise or a warning. It's oddly poetic, if a little unnerving. Of course, historians still argue over the meaning of these small acts. Were they seen primarily as divine signs, or as simple, practical comforts? Some insist the rituals surrounding children's gestures reveal a society obsessed with predicting survival, in a world where mortality hovered close. Others argue the bonds were never mystical, just human beings trying to assign meaning to what already felt extraordinary. The debates slip through the records, unresolved, but they remind us that even the simplest smile or grip carried weight beyond what we see today. Here's where the humor threads its way in. Imagine a medieval parent convinced that a baby's accidental burp was a cosmic omen, perhaps signaling prosperity or doom. You, in contrast, hear a burp and post a triumphant update that digestion is going well. Different errors, same absurdity. Or picture a weary Victorian father interpreting his child's clutch at his coat as a spiritual sign, while you interpret it as a toddler just demanding snacks. Time doesn't erase, the comedyite simply changes the punchline. And in the present, those bonds, though dressed differently, hold the same raw power. That moment when your child grips your hand in a grocery store line, when they lean against you half asleep in the car, when their laugh interrupts your worst day, those are echoes of the same bonds forged centuries ago in candlelit rooms. You might not fear omens in a weak grasp, but you recognize the comfort in a strong one. You understand that love blooms in exhaustion. That connection doesn't wait for perfect conditions. History, in its quietest whispers, asks you to be grateful for this. For the clean water that lets you bathe a child without fear of disease. For the vaccines that protect against nightmares parents once fought with charms. For the fact that you can laugh about superstitions rather than rely on them. And most of all, for the bond that still, despite centuries of change, feels timeless. Because when a tiny hand curls around yours, you know, just as someone did hundreds of years ago in a drafty cottage, that no amount of fatigue can erase the warmth of being chosen in that moment. So you keep going, keep swaying, keep laughing at the absurdity of your exhaustion. Because beneath the spilled milk and the sleepless nights, history has left you this truth. The smallest attachments are the ones that last the longest. And if you can see them, even through tired eyes, you are richer than any parent who came before, because you carry both their struggles and the luxury of gratitude. The end of the shift comes, not with fanfare, but with a slow exhale. The kind of release you only notice once the noise softens and the air feels less heavy. The children, finally lulled into uneasy rest, breathe in ragged rhythms, their little bodies curled against each other, as if survival itself were a group effort. You sit back, worn down to the bone, and realize you've just lived through something that is both ordinary and extraordinary, an evening that countless caregivers endured before you, repeating the same cycle of feeding, soothing, cleaning, coaxing, and collapsing. Only now, with the hush of exhaustion settling over the room, do you have space to think. You reflect on the resilience threaded through every small detail. These families, stripped of comfort, manage to find laughter in cracked corners, warmth in threadbare blankets, and love in the midst of scarcity. Children who played with scraps of wood, who invented games from dust and shadows, somehow carried joy in their eyes. You realize how much of human survival wasn't just about food or shelter, it was about the capacity to find meaning in almost nothing. That lesson feels sharper than any history book could deliver. And then, like a trick of contrast, your mind leaps to your own world, where snacks hide in every cupboard, where a soft bed waits with clean sheets, where a nap can be interrupted not by rats or coughing, but by the buzzing of a phone. The luxury of silence, of predictable meals, of clean pajamas, things you scroll past in catalogs or take for granted after a long day, suddenly feel like miracles. Your ancestors would have looked at a washing machine with the awe of a cathedral, a fridge, practically divine intervention. Even the idea that a baby can cry in a temperature-controlled room without fear of smoke or draft is, when you think of it, staggering. Of course, the irony keeps you smiling. You complain about Wi-Fi dropping during your favorite show, but you've just witnessed how people once fought to keep children alive with little more than instinct and determination. You grumble about your toddler refusing organic fruit snacks, while a medieval parent prayed for enough bread to last the week. Gratitude sneaks in not as a lecture, but as a sly comparison. Modern frustration looks suspiciously like luxury when you hold it up against history. Common sights of the past linger in your mind. The cramped beds where families slept like puzzle pieces. The crowded hearths where smoke doubled as both heat and hazard. The stubborn resilience of children finding games in filth. These were not staged anecdotes. They were daily life. They form a mirror, showing you how much humanity has endured, and how much you inherit without even realizing. And yet, among the grime and chaos, the most enduring thing wasn't misery, it was love stitched into survival. Stranger fragments still echo in your thoughts. Few know, for example, that in some villages, lullabies weren't just soothing songs, but subtle warnings disguised as music, telling children to beware of dangers outside the home. The melody calmed, while the lyrics cautioned. Imagine that, bedtime as both comfort and survival strategy. You wonder if the child's peaceful face in your arms once drifted into sleep, guided by words you'd mistake for gentle poetry, but which actually carried the sharp edge of fear. Details like these, rarely mentioned, deepen the sense that history's tenderness always came wrapped in necessity. And, as always, the debates slip in through the cracks. Did families in these harsh conditions primarily bond through love or through shared struggle? Some historians suggest survival forced affection into existence. Others argue affection was the one thing that made survival possible. Neither side wins, not really. But the discussion reminds you that resilience itself is a complicated inheritance, part instinct, part tenderness, part sheer refusal to give in. So here you are, at the quiet close of the day, with gratitude humming in your chest. Gratitude not in the form of grand declarations, but in the small, ordinary awareness that you can go home to warmth, to food, to comfort. Gratitude that your exhaustion can be eased by a soft pillow instead of a dirt floor. Gratitude for the clean water waiting at the turn of a tap. For the safety that lets a child dream without fear. If history whispers one thing to you in this moment, it is this: the comforts you dismiss as background scenery are treasures someone once would have fought for, prayed for, perhaps never even imagined. And while you can't rewrite the past, you can honor it by noticing the present, by laughing a little more when the Wi-Fi fails, by sighing a little less when the grocery store runs out of your favorite snack, by holding on just a bit tighter when a small hand curls into yours. Because the real gift of these reflections isn't guilt, it's perspective. And perspective, if you let it, turns ordinary life into quiet abundance. You leave the room with tired steps, but a lighter heart, carrying not just exhaustion, but also the reminder that you live in an age that once would have looked like paradise. And that awareness, soft and steady, is a lullaby of its own.